Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to see so many of you joining in with us this afternoon as part of our Recovery Festival to today's webinar, which is on family therapy supporting recovery for service users and their families. Today's webinar will be undertaken by a member of the Department of Social Work, Elaine McGoldrick. Elaine is a family therapist attached to the Eating Disorder Services, and I'm really delighted that Elaine has been able to join us today to share her knowledge and experience of family therapy and its impact in terms of the recovery for service users and their families. My name is Elaine Donnelly. I'm the head of social work here, and I'm joined by my colleague Niamh Fox, who will be here in the background for moderating the Q&A. We will have time for some questions at the end, hopefully, so pop any questions that you do have in the Q&A. Please note that the webinar will be recorded, so if at any stage you're feeling, the material may be bringing up anything emotional or you're finding it difficult, feel free to take a comfort break, safe in the knowledge that you can come back to the recording at a later date if needed. But hopefully you'll enjoy the webinar and you'll find it valuable and informative. So without further ado, I'll ask Elaine to turn on her camera and we'll kickstart today's webinar.
Okay, hello everybody, welcome to the webinar on family therapy and how family therapy can support service users and their families. Just to say a little bit about family first off. Families provide us with our strongest bonds and most strongest emotional and psychological, financial, social support from cradle to the grave. They shape our attitudes, our beliefs, our behaviours, our emotions, the way we manage relationships from the start of our life to the end of our life. So family is very important. In terms of family, in family therapy doesn't define family just as the people you live with. Obviously they might have the closest influence on you, but it defines them as it can be your family, who you live with, your parents, your siblings, your spouse, but it can also be extended family, uncles, aunts, cousins, friends, carers, and your professional team, or anybody who supports you through recovery, supports you and your family through recovery. If I could have the next slide, please. So just to say a little bit about family therapy. Family therapy arose in the 1960s as an alternative to individual psychotherapy. So individual psychotherapy looks at what's going on within the person, but family therapy looks at the person's relationships and how the person's relationships might be contributing to difficulties, emotional or behavioural problems. And the connections and how to change this through actually changing the relationships and promoting positive communication and positive patterns of interaction. So family therapy is based on systems theory, and systems theory was initially applied to machines. And basically in systems theory, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So that means in terms of machines, if one part of the machine isn't working, then it affects the whole running of the machine and the machine doesn't function properly. So systems theory was applied to family therapy, and family therapy is actually sometimes called systemic psychotherapy. And so family therapy focuses on the whole family, and different parts of the family who may have a problem or be ill, whether that's physical illness or mental illness, or there's a social issue, can affect the whole running of the family and can change the roles and structures in family, can unsettle the family and make family life unpredictable, and stir up a lot of difficult emotions. So therefore, when one person in the family suffers with a mental health issue, all members of the family will be affected. And that's why family therapy is important, not just for the patient or the service user, but for the whole family. If I could have the next slide, please. So family therapy, why family therapy? Well, family therapy has been shown to improve recovery rates for the person with mental illness and reduce the risk of further relapse, and improve the happiness and well-being of families. And basically it allows families to support the recovery of the person, to change the way they interact and are, to best support the recovery of the person. Because mental illness, it doesn't just affect the family, the person and family, but it affects the family emotionally, and also socially and financially. So for instance, it can be the big strain having somebody who has a mental health issue and who maybe has a chronic mental health issue at home. It can disrupt kind of relationships in the family. Maybe somebody in the family, maybe somebody has to give up work and their financial issues. Maybe mum has to take more of a role because dad is depressed. Maybe the children notice and they act out and they become more disruptive. And then there's more conflict between the parents. So it affects everybody, and it can affect the family socially as well, in terms of some people feel that there's a big stigma to mental illness still, and they might be embarrassed about talking about outside the family, or they might withdraw from other people outside because it takes so much energy to manage the difficulties at home. So that's another reason why family therapy is very important, to manage all these issues that can arise when somebody has a mental health issue. If I could have next slide, please. Also, I suppose family therapy is because it's also very close to the recovery model. So both family therapy and the recovery model are strengths-based. That's it. That means that they look at the strength of the family and of the person. They don't look at deficits. They look at what qualities the person has that can progress recovery. They're also solution focused rather than problem focused. So they're not kind of harking back to problems all the time. They're focusing on solutions. What can we do to change things? How can we change things to make them better for the service, easier for the family? What can we do? How can we all help together? Is what family therapy and the recovery model's focus is. So the recovery model focus is also about connection, and the importance of connection and the importance of meaningful life for the service user and their families. And family therapy also follows this thinking. So family therapy will also look at other things outside the family that might be impacting. For instance, the social situation, the economic situation, if there's a disability or there's a difficulty with age, gender, sexuality, all of these things that impact on the family and on the service user will be considered. So family therapy assessment is a broad assessment about all of the issues that would impact upon the service user and their family. The next slide, please. So this is a really important thing. It's a concept in family therapy called circular causality. Circular causality means that we invite the behavior of others, or we contribute to the behavior of others, and that's really central to family therapy. And it's why family therapy, I suppose, is important. We don't often recognize that our behavior might invite the behavior of another. If we're angry at somebody, that might cause them to withdraw. If we're critical of somebody, that might not mean they might not be able to express their needs. So it's circular, so it goes in a negative feedback loop. So just to give an example here, so say there are friction between the adults and between mum and dad. Dad becomes anxious and depressed, mum becomes worried. The children notice the adult's distress. They can feel the tension in the house. They know something's not quite right, and relationships might not be the same with mum and dad as they were. So the children become disruptive or upset, and then mum and dad engage in more conflict and feel more because they're more stressed, and then dad might become more withdrawn and more anxious. So it's basically a circular loop of interaction, with each person contributing to the behavior and to the problem. And in family therapy, this is central, and it's why it's important for all the family to be involved and to help acknowledge their own contribution to whatever behavior is difficult at home or is maintaining a situation at home. Next slide, please. So homeostasis is another concept that family therapy uses, and many people will remember this from biology about how homeostasis is about keeping the environment stable, and when something upsets the environment, it seeks to return to its stable, known place. So all families find change difficult, and in fact, everybody probably finds change difficult, really. And families generally seek to go back to the way they were, to have the roles and structures the way they were previously, to put maybe mum as carer and dad as the disciplinarian, and have these kind of quite rigid roles that sometimes are not helpful. And the problem of that is, I suppose, that when people come home from hospital with all these ideas about how they can manage their health and wellness, such as having engaged in CBT, or having done DBT, or having learned distress tolerance, or have had input from psychology, and they come home to an environment where it's still the same and nothing has changed, and then that's very difficult for them. It doesn't support their recovery, and actually it can drag them back towards relapse and towards the way they were previously. And there's also something about in families that of expectations. You know, if your loved one comes home and you've had repeated times when they've had admissions, and you expect, oh, this will be the same as the last time, there's nothing different, nothing changing, then those expectations of somebody can actually, you know, they will meet those lower expectations you have of them. So it's important that the family acknowledges that they need to change when the person comes home. There's also stuff like just looking at the roles below about dysfunctional roles in family that keep family problems intact and prevent change. So some of these might be the enabler or caretaker. So for instance, if you have somebody who has OCD at home and they're in the kitchen cleaning for 6 hours and you can't get in to cook or anything, but you don't want to do anything about it because it'll just cause consternation at home. You know, that's enabling the person. So it's not letting the person challenge their behavior. It's letting behavior stay as it is. So basically what we want is to be able to people to challenge their behavior gently, and not to maintain behavior that's inappropriate or that's leading towards mental illness. You also get the idea of somebody maybe doing all the caretaking at home. So if somebody has a mental illness, maybe say for instance depression or high anxiety, they might not be able to engage in all the tasks they did at home, and that's okay for a while. But if that's carried on long term and the person doesn't move towards taking responsibility and getting back into life, then they end up, you know, staying where they are. The mental health doesn't improve, they feel worse, and their self-esteem is decreased, they feel disempowered. And the person who's doing the caretaking then might feel resentful and unhappy and angry at the person who's ill and not making progress. So it's basically in family therapy, it's that we all can actually work together as a family to help somebody's progress towards recovery, and what we all can do. How can I help you? How can you help me? Other roles in a family that we see as well in terms of maintaining poor mental health and family dysfunction are the scapegoat role. The scapegoat is the person who's blamed for all the problems. So it's the problem child. It could be somebody with the mental health problem who's, you know, it's their problem. The family's fine, but it's their problem. But, you know, family therapy views, as I said, that everybody in the family is responsible for contributing to behaviour. So really, when somebody's ill or there's an issue at home, it's everybody's responsibility, not just one person. So there's no one person that's responsible for family dysfunction according to family therapy. And the problem with these rigid roles is that they keep people from solving the problem. So if you're the enabler or you're caretaking too much, it doesn't allow the real issues to be resolved. And if you're blaming somebody in the family for the problems, then it doesn't let you look at your own role or the role of others in the problem. You could also have roles like the hero, for instance, in family. They're the ones who are doing fine, and despite the chaos at home, everything is just grand. They've got through school, they've got through college, they've got the wonderful job, everything looks great on the outside. So they're held up as the kind of emblem for the family, but really the family problems still aren't being solved, and this hero has the great burden of carrying this burden of, you know, looking well to the outside world when they might be feeling confused and upset and stressed underneath it. There's also roles like the lost child, which you can often see in families where there is a lot of conflict. The lost child is very quiet, doesn't get into trouble, doesn't say anything, doesn't you know, ask for anything or trouble anybody about anything. They're almost invisible, and of course this is very, very unhelpful and bad really if you're a child. And the problem with this is that they can go unnoticed, their needs can go unnoticed and unmet. And often when they're adults, they have great difficulty in managing close relationships and managing to get their needs met or trusting other people. So these roles then are that dysfunctional roles that are adopted within the family. It's important to resolve them because it has implications for relationships as adults and for your life, really. The mascot is another type of role which is quite common. It's the person who is quite funny and will try to I suppose diffuse a difficult situation or a tense situation at home with being funny and being the clown of the family. You'd often hear of the class clown in school. But again, this doesn't get the needs met. It diffuses the situation, but the underlying issues are still there. And I suppose for the mascot, who might be a child growing up, they kind of tend to minimize their needs. So when they get into relationships afterwards, they kind of minimize the stress or tension and don't deal with problems either. So these kind of roles that people take in a family can carry on afterwards. So if I could have the next slide, please. So homeostasis and recovery. So what we're looking for is really that when a person changes, the system must change with them. So basically the system needs to change effectively. So this is, I suppose if there are lots of resentment in home, anger, hostility, those kinds of emotions going home, or lack of trust, these all need to be processed. And the best way to process them is in a safe, contained environment where people might have grievances from growing up or be afraid to ask for their needs or have difficulty managing anger within the family, so that all of these issues can be processed. These affective or mood issues or emotional issues can be processed in a safe way in a family therapy session. Cognitive is, this system needs to change cognitively, because cognitive is like, just for an example, it's like often in families, they sort of give negative attributions to each other. Oh, he's always the lazy one, she's always the responsible one, he never does what he's asked for, he's always angry, she's always complaining. So they give negative attributions to people, and that keeps people locked in unhelpful roles and gives people a set identity, and sometimes it can be very hard for people to change the roles and the negative attributions that people give them. Other stuff like cognitive elements of would be sort of like discounting the positive. So in families, maybe they have got into a very negative way of thinking. So when anybody does anything positive, they discount it. And they kind of overgeneralize things, and don't recognize maybe the resiliences they have, or the good that's in other members in the family. Environmental, so the system must change environmentally. So just to give an example of this, so say somebody has an addiction problem and they're going home and they've had 2 weeks or 3 weeks of treatment here, and they're going home and other members of the family are drinking and there's loads of alcohol around, and so that's not going to be helpful. It's not going to be helpful if the person who has an eating disorder goes home and there's no food in the house, there's nobody to help them with meal support. So all of that are related to environmental. Environmental can also mean stuff like high expressed emotion at home. So you don't want to go home to a home where there's lots of resentment, criticism, hostility, sarcasm. It's called high expressed emotion, and it's really a trigger for relapse for everybody, for depression, anxiety, eating disorders. So that's why it's important to have a relaxed atmosphere at home to process those difficult emotions, those feelings, before the patient goes home. Next slide, please. So what maintains family dysfunction? Well, poor interpersonal communication. So what do I mean by that? So I suppose it's stuff like, when somebody tries to talk about something at home and they're met with, anger, hostility, stonewalling, not talking. So you've brought up an issue at home and the other person doesn't talk to you for a couple of days. Resentment, criticism, you know, of a person, getting angry, getting defensive, all of these kind of behaviors that actually prevent people from sitting down calmly and talking about a problem and taking each other's perspective into account. That's all considered poor communication. There's also an issue with families as well, weak boundaries. So in families in weak boundaries, say if it's an enmeshed family, you know, they're all take on each other. They're often actually, enmeshed families are actually often appear to be very close, but are actually too close. They don't allow for any differences of opinions. You know, it's very kind of risky to disagree with the family. You have to toe the family line. Often they don't allow you to talk about your issues outside. So if you've got a mental health issue and you're in a mesh family, and they probably don't want you to say it to anybody else. They're probably worried about what the neighbours would say or what the extended family would say. So they keep everything very closed in. And it's very difficult to be autonomous, to do things differently, to be different in an enmeshed family. And often they sort of like they pick up on each other's emotions very easily. So if dad is angry, you know, mom is really stressed, and then the children pick up the tension. And so it kind of goes around in a circle. So they pick up one another's emotions very, very quickly. And often these are the type of families that end up walking on eggshells around each other. So these families kind of need more to more separation, more identification of what's your emotion and what's my emotion, what are your needs and what are my needs, what can I do for you and what can I not do for you, what are my limits, what are my boundaries. Other families then are very detached, and so in detached families, they're like ships passing the night. They might not know much about each other's lives. The conversations are very superficial. There's no talking about anything deep issues or anything. And the problem with these type of families is that they don't provide the support and connection to be able to meet people's needs. So that's also difficult when people leave hospital. So what other types of situations arise in families? I suppose one we see an awful lot is inability for people to say their needs, to speak about their needs. Common thing is that they're afraid that their needs can't be met. They're afraid of people's reactions to their needs. They're afraid of not being listened to. All of these things, or they feel they don't deserve it. You know, if you're in a family and your needs haven't been listened to consistently, or you haven't been validated, you know, you validate. When I mean validated, I mean that somebody's sitting down respectfully and listening to you and sharing your concerns, even if they can't do anything about it, but just listening to, and so that you know that your concerns are important. If that's happened in your family, it's very, very difficult to express your needs or to communicate one's needs, and especially if there's lots of conflict going on. Difficulty dealing with emotions. A lot of families find it very difficult to deal with emotions. It's, you know, maybe sometimes emotions they're very reactive. Their emotions are, you know, all over the place. They're very out there. They're angry, intense, and argumentative. Other times, then other people in the family might suppress their emotions, maybe because they're afraid that they'll ignite another member of the family and then create more tension, and it's just not worth it. So they might suppress their emotions. So the problem with suppressing emotions is that, you know, feelings tell us something. They tell us what we need, and they tell us what is important to us. So they're important to acknowledge and to as a way of understanding ourselves and what we need. The problem with, I suppose, if you've got emotions that are very reactive all the time and are out there and very heightened, and there's a lot of verbal aggression, whatever, then that can damage relationships and damage trust as well. So you know, we want to be able to look at our emotions calmly within a family setting and to see what they're telling us and what they need and underneath, but not be explosive about them or suppress them. The lack of trust in family members. Lack of trust can arise from, I suppose, we just talked about it, about one's needs not being met repeatedly over many years. Family doesn't validate each person's needs and feelings. It can be, mental health issues can breach trust as well, because, you know, there can be a chronic pattern to them sometimes, and people are hoping that somebody will change, and they don't change. Or they can't change. It's not often that they don't change, it's sometimes they can't change, really. It's more the issue. So it's about, and there can be lack of trust in families when they, you know, I suppose the trust has been breached, and maybe there's been wrong in families, maybe families haven't admitted. Maybe it's difficult for families, in some families, to admit that they did something wrong, or for people in family to admit that they weren't there, they didn't listen, they should have done something differently when their child was bullied at school, or they should have noticed something earlier and they didn't, or they didn't get help in the right way, or they wish they'd done something differently. So within family therapy is non-blaming, so we don't seek to blame the person. We seek to actually understand what we could do differently next time, but also to take responsibility. If you weren't there for somebody because there was other stuff going on, to be able to say it, and that's not a reflection of you as a person, but it's just the situation at the time. You didn't know how to do things differently or in a different way, but now we're moving on to something different, to not letting that happen again. So that family also going to have a message about not talking. So this is something that arises frequently. I spoke about the enmeshed family and how they like to keep everything inside and not share it with others, and don't the whole, don't wash your dirty linen in public Irish saying. It's very much there. So families can have a belief about not talking, that it doesn't help, that you don't let people know about what's going on inside. The stiff upper lip of the British culture. So all these things can contribute to what maintains family dysfunction. It's important to, it's important to be able to share what's going on inside. Feelings of shame and wanting to keep things inside can actually make things worse. When you shine a light on them, it's a lot better. Obviously, you need to be able to talk to people, to share stuff with people who are safe and who you can trust. Next slide, please. So impact of mental illness in family. Well, we talked about the roles and the expectations and the structure of the family. So, I said it earlier about if dad has depression, mum might have to take on, dad might be at work, mum might have to take on more of the financial load. She might have to go back to work full time. Maybe dad isn't able to partake in household chores, so a lot of them might fall to mum or to maybe older siblings or older children. Younger children might notice that dad isn't the same, he doesn't engage emotionally with them as much, he's withdrawn. Children can often think it's them and that there's something they did and they don't understand the illness, and that's actually why it's very important for children to have some understanding of mental illness, and in a language that is appropriate to children, and for families to discuss it, not to hide it. It's really important. Otherwise, children can think that it's something that they did. So expectations within the family can change. Maybe dad did a lot of the disciplining, or dad took the children out, and this has changed as well. So there can be a lot of family conflict as well at home, stress when the people are ill and they're trying to manage appointments, the person's mental health, trying to manage things at home, and they just feel overwhelmed. Overfunctioning and underfunctioning. I just want to say a little bit about that, because that's kind of going back to the idea of the enabler and the caretaker, because sometimes people can care too much and do too much. So when you have somebody with a mental health issue, it's about, as a family and for the person who has a mental health issue, making small incremental goals towards the recovery, but doing so on a regular daily basis. So again, if one person is over functioning in the family, there's no balance there, and family therapy is all about getting balance in the family. So somebody's over functioning, they're doing everything, they're super responsible, they've got everything under control, they know when all the appointments are, they're managing the children, the home, everything. And so then that leaves, you see this particularly in couple relationships, and then the other person is under functioning and they feel helpless and disempowered. So they have too little responsibility, and the other person has too much responsibility. And the person who's over functioning can feel, overwhelmed and stressed, but it can also become an identity where that's what they do, that's what they're like, and that's not good long term, because it can lead to burnout, and it also has effects on other members of the family, like the superhero in the family, but the other person is not doing their bit at all, or becomes in that role of not doing their bit, even though they might want to. So it's about balance in the family. It's about each person's family taking responsibility in relation to their age and their roles in the family, but each person contributing equally, really. So transition stress, yeah, we all have transitions in our lives. Like there's transition to, for instance, some of the big transitions are leaving home, and that is difficult for parents and children. And it's the other is, starting relationships outside the family as an adult, then, getting married, and then that changes your relationship with each other and with your family, and then having children, that changes relationships again. And then as children grow and you have a family and you might have older parents and the sandwich generation, and be caring for your own children and caring for elderly parents. And so that's a difficult time as well. And that changes your relationship with your parents and the rest of your family. So family is about transition. And sometimes transitions can be stressful, and especially if there are very rigid roles in the family and there's not a lot of balance in the family, transitions can be even more stressful. Just in relation to feelings, again, we spoke about some of the feelings that can emerge in families when there is a mental health issue. So lack of trust, frustration, feelings of helplessness, resentment, anxiety. Will things change? Will it get better? Is this what it's always going to be like? Also, we spoke about embarrassment, feeling of stigma, feeling I can't talk about this outside the family, or what do I tell people? This can be an issue for the person with the mental health issue and also for their family. And abandonment. I suppose, families, when there's huge amount of stress, they can engage in what family therapy refers to as cut off, when they just, in relation to overwhelming stress, they just say, that's it, I can't do it anymore, I can't cope with anymore, a strong emotion with strong feelings, it's just too much. And so we want to prevent that as family. We want to keep the family, we want open communication within family so that that doesn't happen, and so we can find solutions to prevent abandonment. If I could have the next slide, please. So I'm just going to, so a lot of people are afraid of family therapy and afraid that there's going to be conflict in sessions, which is going to happen at home, and things are going to be raised in the session, which will cause conflict at home, which means that people return to old patterns of stonewalling or sarcasm or anger or defensiveness. So this is just a little video to kind of explain what family therapy is about and how it can be safe and helpful.
On my last visit to see my son, Mark, in the hospital, I noticed his attitude had improved. I was relieved to see him smile. Supporting him in his recovery journey isn't always easy. Our last several family visits with Mark were intense. My husband and I are fighting more, and I tend to lose my patience quickly with my other child. We'd sometimes just sit in silence. We didn't know how to react or what we could say to make his situation better. Mark's therapist suggested that we could benefit from family therapy. We initially brushed the idea aside. At the time, my husband and I thought our family didn't need any help. I assumed it was Mark who had all the issues. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that trying to cope with the challenges of Mark's mental health condition had taken a toll on the whole family. I made a call to Mark's therapist. He recommended a licensed therapist who specializes in family therapy.
Family therapy is a type of psychotherapy or talk therapy in which members of a family attend sessions together. The family group may be as small as 2 people and may be composed of people who live together or apart. The goal is usually to improve communication and connections between family members, resolve conflict, and potentially learn about a loved one's diagnosis.
I was nervous about family therapy. I wasn't sure how my family would handle these sessions. I braced myself for the first meeting with the therapist.
At our first appointment, the therapist explained the ground rules she expected us to follow. She provided us a form which listed the rules and asked all of us to honor each one.
The therapist let each of us talk about how we communicate and how we respond when we feel angry with one another. It wasn't easy, but I'm glad we were honest with each other. After a few sessions, we planned to start working on our new communication skills. The therapist even assigned us homework. She asked us to spend an evening doing an activity together. It was a little awkward at first, but still fun.
We stuck to it, kept going to therapy and doing our homework. And it has been paying off. Things are better now, and we're less tense around each other. Managing Mark's condition is also a bit easier since we're talking more and using the new skills we've learned. My husband noticed the difference, and he started coming to therapy with us. Together, we're working to make each day better as a family.
Next slide, please. So goals of family therapy. So I saw from that video that family therapy is about families feeling more connected, feeling more supported, and it's about, at its heart, it's about open, honest, and direct communication and supporting that. So I suppose the first thing about family therapy is it's a safe place to explore and express difficult thoughts and emotions, and to deal with family conflicts. And safety is very important. And I meet a lot of people who say, oh my God, if my family come to a session, I'll say something, I'll upset somebody else, and then they'll be angry with me when I leave the session, or they might be angry in the session. So just to say that, when the family therapist is running a session, there are certain ground rules, and the ground rules are mutual respect, no interruptions, turn taking, no personal attacks. And if there is a chance that people are afraid, if that's one of the issues that they're afraid that after a session that there might be conflict at home about what was said, then part of the homework it would be to actually not engage in conflict, or not engage in talking about what was said in a session, but maybe the task is to actually avoid conflict and avoid that criticism, and to bring it back to the next session, so it remains in a safe space until these issues can be processed over a number of sessions. So also family therapy, it's about understanding each other's views and experiences and needs. So in a family therapy session, the family therapist will ask everybody their view on the problem. And often people have very different views and ideas on a person's problem or the family's problem, and on solutions. And they might have very different views of the person's mental illness and what would help and what would not help. So it's basically getting everybody's view on the problem, and helping everybody to express their needs and what they need from the family, and what would make family life different for them or better for them. So at its heart, it's about fostering cohesion and connection with the family. So we're opening communication, making it clear, direct, and honest, so that the family can communicate better and can come closer in a positive way, not in a meshed way where they're walking on eggshells around each other, but in a positive way, where there are clear boundaries, where people know their clear expectations of each other in terms of roles and in terms of their age, and appropriate roles for people. Where there's togetherness, but there's independence. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to be different. And where there are limits to people's behavior, and boundaries. I can do this view in a family, but I can't do this view. I can say no this time because I don't have enough energy to do this. And there's a limit to things as well. So it's about all family members getting their needs met and being heard and understood. Another goal of family therapy is integral to family therapy is problem solving. So again, as I mentioned before, family therapy doesn't concentrate on problems, it concentrates on solutions. So it's all the family coming together to think about, how can I help with this? What can you do to help me? And what can I do to help you? And how can we solve this together? So it's problem solving and looking at the strengths of the family. And when families look back, often when they're in a problem, they can't see all of the strengths they have. But when they look back and see, the things they've come through before, the difficulties they've encountered, and how they've managed, and they're still here, and then they can identify strengths and make the story of the family not all about what's wrong, but actually what's right with their family too, which is very important. Obviously, altering negative patterns of interaction is very important, and that's the goal of family therapy. So it's trying to find out what happens when, say, dad gets angry. What happens before dad gets angry? What triggered that off? And what did dad give a meaning to that event. Say, for example, supposing a child is acting out, then the parents can often think that that's because the child is bold, and they try, and the punishment, it doesn't work. What happened before that child was acting out? Was there an issue? Did he pick up tension in the home? Did he have a fight with his brother, and mom told to hold him off, and whereas the child wanted to be listened to, and maybe the little brother was getting on his nerves or whatever. But it's to try and see to try and alter these patterns of negative interaction. So what can mom and dad do differently next time that doesn't feed into that pattern, that calms it down, and that gets needs and feelings understood? And also to reduce conflict. We spoke about how family therapy is a safe place to actually discuss conflicts that arise within the family. These conflicts might arise continually, or they might erupt periodically. So what does a functional family look like? Because that's what family therapy seeks to promote, is functional family dynamics. So support and appropriate care for all in the family, a feeling of security and a sense of belonging, and that each person in the family feels important, respected, and esteemed. The conflict is managed appropriately, and there are clear expectations and limits for all members of the family. Next slide, please. So what will you do in I suppose, in a family therapy session, and how do we achieve these goals? Well, each family member will be considered in terms of their personal happiness and health goals. What is the goal of each member? What would they like? How do they feel the family could be improved? What do they need from the family that maybe they're not getting now? And then there's a unified family goal about what do we all want as family? How would we like our family to be? What if we were to imagine there's something called a miracle question in family therapy. So if all the problems were solved tomorrow, and you woke up and there was no problems, how would you like your family to be? What would you be doing? How would it be different? And so that's the unified family goal. So again, it's identifying what each person in the family may need to do, what their contribution is to achieving these personal and these unified family goals. So again, we spoke about the different elements that need to change within a family. So for each individual, it's looking at, for instance, physical goals. Do children need an earlier bedtime? Are they tired in the day and cranky? Do parents stay up too late and then they're wrecked the next day? Are people eating well and they're healthy? Are they not having good nutrition? Are they using unhealthy coping mechanisms, such as maybe alcohol in the evening, which makes them hungover and tired the next day? So these are physical issues. Then we look at how maybe effectively, again, how each person can help to manage and process and deal with feelings of anger, resentment, fear, guilt, and shame. How we can manage this as a family and individually as well. How can we process these difficult feelings? Environmentally, again, I spoke about, returning home with an environment that isn't supportive. So how can each person contribute to maintaining a good environment at home? Like for the instance with the person with an alcohol issue, returning to home where the parents or siblings were drinking and the house is full of alcohol, or returning home to high expressed emotion, anger, hostility, and criticism, how that can pull you back. So each person in the family and family as a whole needs to think about these issues and find out ways of addressing these issues. And again, cognitively, how can they change their thinking patterns to each one of them, and together as a family to sort of have to eliminate cognitive distortions and negative thinking about other members of the family, and how they can look at the positives in each person in the family as well. So how can they address personally and as a family poor boundaries or tolerating walking on eggshells? How can they have their own needs and values respected? How can they deal with issues of trust, etc.? So these relation issues also need to be addressed on an individual and a family level. Can I have the next slide, please? The role of the family therapist in the family therapy session, which I just spoke briefly about it before, about how one of the roles is, a significant role and a very important role, is to maintain safety in the family session. So like I said, that involves ground out rules of honesty and mutual respect, no personal attacks, in not interrupting people, letting people speak. These are very important ground rules in family therapy. And of course, no violence. And just to say that if there is a history of violence, that families might not be seen altogether in the same session, that the therapist will usually see the person separately, see families separately initially, and that there may be a contract for no violence established before therapy begins as a family. So in supporting individual families, so family therapy is all about the family therapist being neutral. So when I say neutral, that means that she doesn't take sides with any family member, and so she avoids forming coalitions. Coalitions can often form in families where, you know, in a couple, say mum has a overly close relationship with her daughter, and dad is pushed out, so they no longer feel like a couple. Then dad feels resentful, and maybe the daughter feels, you know, isn't developing properly because she's too close to mum. So there's all these things that can happen in families as well with coalitions, when inappropriate coalitions form within a family. So the therapist doesn't allow that to happen in a family therapy session. Central to family therapy is the idea that all behaviour is communication. So communicate something, a need to be addressed or whatever. So she helps the family to view behaviour as a way of communicating. So in family therapy, the problem is not the person, the problem is the problem. So the person with OCD isn't the problem, it's the OCD is the problem. The person with anorexia is not the problem, it's the anorexia that's the problem. So they see behaviour as a way of communicating. For instance, with anorexia, behaviour may be about the behaviour restriction, may be to do with dealing with difficult emotions. It may be to do dealing with anxiety because it kind of numbs pain. Problem of self-cutting can be to do with staying safe. Maybe if somebody didn't cut, their self-harm would be far more dangerous. So what need is the behaviour communication? What need is under the anger and under the defensiveness? Often under defensiveness, for instance, there's issues with self-esteem. When somebody says you've done something wrong and you have poor self-esteem, then you become defensive. So the family therapist will help the family to define the problem clearly, and this is why it's important to get everybody's views, because everybody will have different ideas on what exactly is the problem and how to solve it. But it's important to come to a clear definition of the problem and to get everybody on board to get their views. Help families to work together to solve the problem. We all spoke about that, about how can I help you and the family to achieve this goal, either the family goal or the personal goal. How can you help me? What do I need to be able to help you, and to be assertive about our needs. I can't do this unless you help me with this. Communicate directly and assertively, and no mind reading or supposition. So you want to move away from mind reading and thinking, well, he's thinking that or she's thinking this. So it's direct, clear, open, honest communication. So helping members to find alternative, mutually acceptable ways of moving forward. So they have to be acceptable to all family members. How can we move forward together? What's acceptable to us? What can get all our needs met in moving forward? And in helping families also to move away from rigid and unhelpful roles such as the enabler, the mascot, that maintain poor communication. So when you have honest, direct, open, assertive communication and good boundaries, these roles no longer need to be there. So and so they dissolve. So next slide, please. So what to expect from a family therapy session? Well, family therapy sees the whole family or parts of the family. It's helpful if the family therapist sees the whole family initially. Sometimes people can't come, they're working, it doesn't suit them. Also, people don't want to come to the first session. Maybe they'll say, oh, I'll go to a couple of sessions later to see how it goes first. With the other members of the family, families can also be afraid of going, they're afraid, obviously, as I mentioned, they could be afraid of what it might open up. As many of the family can come as possible initially would be helpful. When all the family are there, you can more clearly see as a family therapist how the family interacts with each other. Who's the quiet one? Who's the dominant one? Who says very little? Who gets distracted easily? So you can see all these different dynamics. What I often say to people is, you know, if you don't want to come there with your family because you might find it difficult to speak out, you're afraid of their reaction, you're not used to speaking out about your needs or what you feel is wrong, then maybe come to an individual session first, and we can see how to make it safe for you to join the rest of the family. So as I said, the intention of the family therapist is to see how everyone views the problem and how they interact with each other and the roles they play with the family. And the family therapist maintains a collaborative, neutral stance. That means family therapist is not an expert. She's somebody who goes on a journey with you. So she's not going to tell you to do this or do that. She's going to explore with you as a family what you think are the best solutions and options. Can I have the next slide, please? Some things that might happen in the family as well are drawing a genogram, for instance. Genogram is a diagram of your family, and it can go back about 3 generations or 4 generations. So it can go back to parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, or children, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. And what a genogram does, it kind of marks in you know, significant events in family life. So understanding, you know, patterns that have been handed down from your family are very important. As I said before, we learn how to behave, think, or to do with emotions, relationships, etc., from our family of origin, or family that we're born into, and they learned it from somebody else. So often patterns of behavior and attitudes that are not helpful have been handed down generations. Like, for instance, that, you know, maybe anger solves the problem. Getting angry gets your needs met, when it doesn't really. It creates a situation where other people are scared to talk about their needs, and you know, it ruptures relationships. Or, you know, somebody growing up in a family that didn't ever, you know, talk about things can think, well, what's the point? It doesn't get addressed, or not know how to talk about things. Or a family where their needs were never met. Maybe there was family were working all the time, whatever, and there was no time for much for the children, and family life was very busy, and they never got to talk about their needs, or nobody asked them about their needs. They might have a hard time talking about their needs, or asking about their needs, or even mentioning their needs to maybe their spouse or to other members in the family. So the patterns, it's important to be aware of intergenerational patterns, and patterns that might have come down from grandparents to parents, and to choose. Actually, I always say to people to choose, to, when you become aware of them, to choose which ones are helpful and which ones are not for your own family life. Establishing a timeline. A timeline can be very helpful. Sometimes it's very difficult to see where, you know, what happened and when, and what was going on when something happened. So a timeline can bring you back to, you know, the different transitions that you had in your life, what was occurring. And sometimes with a timeline, when you mark out, think of what occurred over time, like from when you were a parent, when you had your children, to maybe the time when your first child was born and what was happening around that time, and maybe we're looking after parents, maybe the parent died, how are things for you then? You can come to see all the different things that impacted on your family life, and actually you can see the story of your family, but also see how well you've coped as well, and the strength of your family, which is very important. Again, tracking dysfunctional behaviours. This is back to looking at how negative patterns start in the family, and when they start, what are the signals that say they're about to start, and what are the consequences of them, and what can we do? Can we change these patterns? Can we become more aware of them and change them? And working with families to replace them. The next slide, please. So these are questions about family functioning. So this is adapted from Professor Peter Stratton in the UK, who's part of the Association of Family Therapy in the UK. So basically there are questions to assess family function. So there are just a few questions to, I suppose, you know, to reflect. Either you can answer the questions can be answered, they don't apply to you at all, or they apply a lot, and so 1 to 5 in between that. So there are questions to basically maybe if you answer some of these questions as that they apply to you quite a lot, it might signify that family therapy might be helpful. So the first question is, in my family we talk about things that matter to us. That's very important in families. People often don't tell each other the truth in my family, so they hide things, and you don't know what's going on, you know what's truth and what's not, and that can make you feel quite insecure. Each of us gets listened to in our family, so we get listened to and validated. Our concerns are important for all of the family. it feels risky to disagree in our family. That's kind of back to the enmeshed family that we spoke about. So if it's risky to disagree in your family, you have to keep quiet. You can't say things out. You can't be different. You can't be autonomous. We find it hard to deal with everyday problems. So, you know, we go from crisis to crisis. We might there might be a lot of tension and stress at home. We don't know how to problem solve. We have just got stuck in the mire, really. We trust each other, so we can be open with each other. We can ask each other for help. We know that we'll be there for each other. We know that we have each other's back, that we'll be able to listen to each other. It feels miserable in our family, so the miserable could be a lot of tension, stress, anger, acting out behaviours. You know, life feels intolerable at home, and you know, people just go to the room, they don't talk. When people in my family get angry, they ignore each other on purpose. Stonewalling or ignoring somebody on purpose. I've come across that quite a lot, and I suppose that's about control and punishment and hurt. And of course, it's very punishing for the other person as well, and it leads often to the breakdown of relationships. And that's something we would work to change. We seem to go from one crisis to another in my family, so nothing really gets solved. Family life is always hectic. It's just we're stumbling along, and it never feels calm and connected. So that's kind of about problem solving and solutions, and coming together to work together to find ways of managing. When one of us is upset, we get looked after within the family. So you know, we get validated, we get listened to, our problems are considered important. There's somebody there to talk with us. And that's very important to feel, you know, our feeling that we deserve to be heard comes from being listened to over our lifetime, and that leads to feeling that we can expect our needs to be met. And that's very important in a family, to have that expectation that our needs will be met. Next slide, please. So people in the family are nasty to each other, so we criticize, we put each other down. It feels really unsafe to say things. We don't know when we might be the butt of somebody's jokes, criticism. So that's really important to address those issues. People in my family interfere in each other's lives too much. We might know too much about each other. We can't have any emotional privacy. We can't keep some secrets. It's important in every family to have, you know, to be able to keep some secrets, but not very significant ones, but to keep some things to ourselves is important. But also, you know, you should be in a family where you can, if you need to share a secret, you can. And secrets are funny things. So, you know, really significant secrets like affairs and stuff, and can really damage families because people know there's something wrong, even the children. But we all, I suppose when I say secrets, I mean private life, we all need to keep something private. So it's important that families don't interfere in each other's lives too much, that you give people space as well, are there for them, and are connected to them. In family, we blame each other when things go wrong. You know, blame is about, I suppose, not taking responsibility and deflecting it onto somebody else. Maybe it's too hard to take responsibility for our part in it, so it's easier to blame somebody else. Maybe we feel we can't take responsibility, where we don't have the skills, but it puts it onto somebody else, and then the whole issue doesn't get resolved, and it actually escalates into the other person feeling blamed, feeling bad themselves, feeling distressed, and that continues on. So in our family, we're good at finding new ways to deal with things. So in our family, we're good at problem solving, we're good at finding solutions, we work together, and that's very positive. So that's the end of today's webinar. Thank you very much for joining. Please feel free to ask any questions.
Thanks so much for that, Elaine. That was really informative. If anyone has any questions, if you want to just pop them into the Q&A box. I think we just have two here, Elaine. Chris is just wondering, can any family avail of family therapy in St. Patrick's, or do you have to be an existing service user?
I am not sure about that, to be honest, whether where I work, you're an existing service user, but that's something that he could inquire about.
Perfect. And just Valerie was wondering if it's possible to get a copy of the slides from today.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can forward the slides. Yeah. Yeah, if you leave her details, I can forward the slide.
Perfect. So I can't see any other questions just now. Thanks so much, Elaine. That was, as I said, really informative, and thanks to everyone. for the attendance today. Just a reminder, the webinar tomorrow is at 10:30, and it's on helping young carers care for themselves, and you can sign up for that through the website. Oh, sorry, just one other question. Sorry, just thanks very much. Very interesting, really informative. So thanks everyone. And like I said, if you want to sign up to tomorrow's webinar, it's through the website. So thanks everyone, and have a lovely day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.